I'm Alexina Louie, composer, and I've been a composer, a professional composer for decades and decades. And that's what I do. I write music.
Yes. Yes, and music that we will be hearing next week. And
Yes,
well, it's such a
yes.
pleasure to meet you, and thanks for joining me today. But the piece we'll be hearing at the upcoming MCO concert, Waking the Lion, was commissioned by the MCO, and on May 5th and 6th, we will enjoy the live performance premiere. And I say live performance premiere because the piece was actually premiered online during the MCO's 2021 Spring and Summer Festival. So we're thrilled that we'll finally hear the piece performed live.
Mm-hmm.
And so you
Live
write a lot
music.
for live
Yeah.
music. Yes, it's amazing.
Live music is fantastic.
Yes. Well, what can you tell us about that first performance when we sing it online?
Well, I wasn't, I wasn't there for any rehearsals. I didn't hear rehearsals. And so it was thrilling to hear it and to know how incredible a percussionist Victoria is. She's really very fine. And it was a very theatrical performance. And, so I was really happy with it. Because of COVID, it had to be done online, had to be offered online, but there were certain specific things that had to do with COVID that were that made it less optimal. And that is that the musicians, the string players were separated in the space. So and that's unusual for a string orchestra. You don't get the same energy level as you do when you're sitting closely together. And also I was not there to determine the balances, and it must have been quite challenging at that time to do it in a space like that with musicians that were spread further apart than normal. So, but it was exciting to hear it.
Yes.
as it always is when you have your first performance, even if it wasn't a live performance, all of the sounds that you keep in your head are suddenly right there. You can hear it, you can feel it. It's thrilling.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And for all of the audience as well, for us to hear that. And now we'll see it live. Yeah, which is also exciting. And also we'll see a lot of that theatrical aspect too.
Yes, because she's moving from different stations of the instruments, from drums to from drums to the marimba to finally metallic. So there's like there's three, well, there's actually more than three sections, but basically that's the major feel. We go from drums, and at the end of the drumming section there's a small quieter section that's more subtle, because so the drum section is very big and powerful, and then we drift off into this the sound of bowed vibraphones and very, very quiet chords being played on the strings. So the interaction is different between the instruments than the drumming part, which sneaks in quietly and then builds to a big climactic section.
And when you say going to different stations, kind of, we see percussionists doing that so much in ensembles, like at the back of an orchestra, they're moving around so much, but to see now a soloist front and center doing that right in front of us, that'll be really exciting.
I'd be excited to see it as well, because it's my first percussion concerto.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I've written a lot for percussion, really almost from the beginning. But to focus just on a soloist playing percussion rather than having the percussion as a partner in a duo, for instance, or in chamber music, or definitely in an orchestra. So you have to handle the material in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned a duo, and it's such a pleasure for me. I performed your piece Cadenzas a few years ago, and that's a really fantastic piece. And I always really enjoy collaborating with percussionists, so that this is really great. And so in the program notes for this piece, you mentioned, well, this piece, Waking the Lion, you mentioned that, so of course, this is your first percussion concerto, and percussion instruments have been integral to your musical voice throughout your compositional career. And maybe you could tell us a bit about writing for percussionists, working with percussionists, writing for percussion instruments.
Even though my instrument is piano, when I write for instruments, I have to take into account the different qualities of each instrument, what they can do, what they can't do, what's physically awkward for them, or and percussion is a whole different kettle of fish, because you're writing for many, many different instruments. But I love the color of percussion. You have a huge range from melodic percussion instruments to, noise-making percussion instruments, found percussion instruments, pot lids and tin cans. But it depends, from my point of view, how you use the sound, how you integrate the sound into the whole of the piece. So, I mean, it's very hard to explain, because it's a bit of magic. It's a combination of compositional skill and technique, but also a search for inspiration at the same time. And in order, at least for my music, in order for a piece to be successful, you have to have both technique and inspiration. If you have all inspiration and no technique, you end up with a piece that might not be as, what's the word I'm looking for? It might not have the depth or the cohesive quality of a piece. And if you have, this is only for myself. I'm only speaking for myself. If one would have too much technique and not have the inspiration that makes that technique, to bring that technique into a different level, then you might have also music that doesn't reach audiences in the same way. So in my music, at least, I have to have both. Early on in my writing career, I realized that I had to find my own musical voice. Now that is, it takes a long time to find your musical voice. And so at that early stage, I said, well, what have I got that's different from thousands of people who have been studying composition? So I started looking at myself and I said, like, my ethnic background is Chinese, but I don't really know Asian music, because I've spent all of my time playing Beethoven and Brahms and studying the canon of music at music school. So I really spent a lot of time looking at Asian inspiration, paintings, dance, gamelan music, Japanese music, Chinese music. I learned how to, I started to learn how to play a Chinese instrument so that I could understand what that was. Why, when I heard Asian music, it moved me in a deep and profound way. So it was really a decades-long search. So
yeah. What's the instrument that you were learning?
It's called the guqin, and it was a string instrument. And I've never played a string instrument. I only played the piano. So there's like a big learning curve for me. And also the notation was in Chinese. And each Chinese character told you it gave you four different instructions, each Chinese character. So it was a big learning curve. So when I started writing music, based on all of this new inspiration for me. I started bringing in certain things into the color of my music, into the way my music unfolded. And it took many years to blend both Western and Asian elements together. And so at that point, my music was really centered on finding the connection between the two worlds from a personal point of view. So Waking the Lion is really, it comes from that part of my musical inspiration. I've been a professional composer for quite a long time. And with
Yes.
each different request, I formulate the piece for the performer, for the group who's playing the composition, for the level of the performer. So over the course of my writing, I've taken the opportunity to expose myself to different kinds of music, but with each style, I would say style, because I've written for television and ballet and opera and piano solo and accordion. I had to find a magical point for each piece. And until I find that, it's a bit of a wandering situation for me until I light on what the meaning of that piece has to be at that time. But each time I do that, I have to write to the top of my capabilities. So Waking the Lion was, offered me this unusual opportunity to write my first percussion concerto for a soloist who is fabulous, and for the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra for strings only. Now, if you think about this combination, it was another one that I had to really think seriously about. How do you do that when a string orchestra is normally a homogeneous sound?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a percussive sound or a forceful sound. When you first think about string orchestra, you think more about lyricism. And that's not what I wanted to do in terms of the percussion soloist. I wanted to be fiery and intriguing and full of zest and full of energy. So I had to find a way to meld the two. So I had to find a solution. And I hope that the audience and the performers find my solution satisfying.
Yes. Well, what is that solution, especially for the strings?
Well, at the beginning, I knew I wanted to start with drums, but before I did that, I wanted there to be a kind of a linchpin for the piece. And that linchpin is a large temple bowl. So there are two parts to the piece, and it's not two movements. They don't stop and start, but you feel a big change in the middle of the piece. So the signal is the temple bowl. It's the sound of the temple bowl. And the percussion begins, that the drums begin with just kind of noise tappings, quiet tappings and rustlings on the drums. And so how to bring in the string orchestra, because if I suddenly brought in a chord of some sort that's bowed, there's going to be a disconnect. Yeah. When really I wanted to set right from the beginning the connection between the two different sound worlds. So I had the strings also. I said, okay, how can I do this? If I want to sneak in the percussion sound rather than start with a big bang, how to do that? So I have them, the drums, she's tapping on the drums and rubbing and just making these quiet sounds. And as I said, to have the strings come in and play a chord or a, you know, it would be a disconnect. So I have them also, I'm giving them instructions on how to tap on their instruments. So that's what you hear. You hear this sound world that is of similar nature. And once that gets established, then you start to hear more recognizable sounds from the strings.
I'm wondering if there was that collaboration. Was there a lot of discussions with Victoria Sparks, the soloist, through the creation process?
Not at the beginning, not at the beginning, but as we moved along, I was, you know, asking her about the kind of instruments that she has, and also because I'm writing for quite a number of percussion instruments, I had to leave enough space for her to move from. You know, writing for percussion, you have to consider the choreography of it too, which is
great way to put it, choreography,
because you have to give them enough time, and because you're not a percussionist, you're not sure how they will physically set it up, but you have in your imagination, oh, if the marimba is here and the, you know, the big tam-tam is over there, how is she going to get from here to there fast enough to, you know, to hit the tam-tam or change a mallet, because physically a percussionist has different requirements from someone sitting at the piano.
Yes,
they have changes of mallets, and they have, you know, different kinds of instruments that they have to perform on that take a different headspace to play. The second section, the second movement, or it's not really movements, but Victoria will play on the marimba. So I have to give her enough time to settle from this quiet chordal section, which comes after the drumming section, and for her to move into the marimba and change her mental space, because she has to play fast passages on the marimba. So it's a, you know, it's a wooden instrument, so it has a different sound from skin instruments or the metal instruments of the vibraphone in the second section of the first part of the piece.
It's going to be fantastic to hear this performed live, but also to see all that choreography. That's so fascinating.
I'm sorry I won't be there to watch it all. And also, you know, when a composer is actually at the rehearsals, you can be the one to make suggestions about whether or not that passage is played too loud, or whether a passage could be played just a little bit slower, or if the balance between the two, the soloist and the orchestra is, you know, the proper balance. But I'm not going to be there. I have to trust everybody.
Yes,
absolutely.
But it's so important for the musicians to have someone in the hall listening during a rehearsal, because it's hard to know what that balance is when you're in the orchestra performing, right? And even for the conductor.
Absolutely.
Yes, and especially, to have the composer there is like the best.
Especially since the percussionist is playing so out there, you know. She really plays. She has cadenzas to play, as one would have in a violin concerto, but it's percussion cadenzas. She plays cadenzas that are unaccompanied, so she gets to just you know,
really
play out. And then there are some cadenzas that are accompanied cadenzas. So you'll see the conductor just give cues for when the orchestra has to play accompanying chords. And then the cues are there to show them when they change, because it's not metered notation at that point. It's play the chord and let Victoria play the musical passage according to how she feels it. and then the conductor follows Victoria's line, and then she cues the next event. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on in the piece. And after the marimba passage, she has to move to the final grouping of instruments. And that final grouping of instruments are ching-chings, which are percussion instruments, two metal plates facing upward, and two facing downward, and you play them by striking them against each other, and they're quite bright sounding.
Yeah.
And the orchestra is chugging along as she's playing these ching-chings. And then at the end, she finally moves to Chinese opera gongs, which I have always loved and have used many times, because they bend. You'll recognize the sound when you hear them, because they bend. They're bending gongs, bender gongs, they're called. And she is, it's very much fun. That's all I can say. So I make a lot of noise at the end of the piece.
Yeah. Fantastic. And it's great. Like if anyone's watching this in advance of the performance, they can maybe Google some of those and see what the instruments look like, and probably hear some examples. Yeah.
And so the title "Waking the Lion" is sort of, comes out of my Asian background. And, lions are part of the mythological beasts that are in the Asian astrological signs. And there's a lot of different actions that one could connect to a big cat, a lion, or a tiger. And I've written pieces that have used the title tiger in them before.
Oh yeah.
But I haven't used one. I have not used the lion. So I thought, oh, well, this works. And because she moves from quiet, mysterious sounds to really vibrant and energetic passages, it's like waking the lion. It's like waking a lion to its full potential. So that's how the title came up.
Yes. Okay.